Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm your host Anna Heslop and today I'm recording a Crop Action Live. So my guests are far cereal researcher Joe Drummond and herbage researcher Richard Chynoweth. And I'm going to start with Joe. What's going on with cereal crops right now?
Right, so what's happening right now is we're gearing up for the really busy part of the season. So all of those really important management decisions are taking place right now and will be over the next month or so.
Okey-doke. So what are the key messages? Like disease control is going to be top of the list right now?
Absolutely. So the farmers will be making decisions around what growth stage 32 applications they're going to be applying and then thinking ahead to what sort of spend they're going to be doing at their growth stage 39, so that really important flag leaf application. They'll also be thinking about whether or not they need to apply an insecticide, and they'll be thinking about what they need to do for controlling diseases in barley, as well as adjusting any nutrient management programs.
Not much then.
Pretty much everything.
Okay. How do we make a decision as to whether or not we need an insecticide?
Right. So again, this is we're coming out of the winter and we're starting to get into our spring risk period. So our spring risk period is when we start seeing aphid flights increasing and the weather's getting a bit warmer and we're starting to see that population build up in some of our crops. What we also are finding is that we're getting towards that growth stage 31 stage, and typically when the crop gets past that stage, it tends to be tolerant of aphid flights and that vectoring virus. So it's really a numbers game and a waiting game to see whether or not that population is going to increase before or after we get to that point. We also have to think about the beneficials in our system, and we also need to think about the weather conditions, because all of those things are going to influence those population dynamics. So it's all about balancing up the risk of those aphids coming into our crops and what that beneficial population is going to be doing.
So what's the best way to check out on that beneficial population?
Well, the best way to look at both is to direct search your crop, and it's a really busy time of year, but it's well worth doing. And it's a relatively simple thing to do. It doesn't take a huge amount of effort. We're also providing that information through our crop action. So we've got a series of monitor paddocks across Canterbury and in Southland. So thanks to Advanced Ag and to PGG Wrightsons who've been helping us with this in Southland. So have a look, walk your crop, look at the undersides of the leaves, because if you look there, you'll find our wingless aphids that won't be picked up on with other forms of trapping. So those are important things to consider. And the other thing to think about is that if you are wanting to maintain the beneficial population in your crop, you need to be selective if you are going to be choosing an insecticide. And really all that insecticide is going to be doing is buying you time to get to that growth stage 31 point where you can ease off and then think about all of the other management decisions that you need to think about.
Okey-doke. So aphids, if they're there, are potentially leading towards disease. So if we're looking at diseases in wheat at the moment, what's going on?
Okay, so there are a number of things that are happening. And again, it's really important to consider all of the diseases and all of the disease resistance ratings across the different diseases for your cultivar, because we know that some are more susceptible to things than others. The main one that's going to be on the radar is controller Septoria triticide blotch. We're coming up to the first of our really important timings, and we need to think about the strategies that we have in place to kind of mitigate that risk. And at the moment, as we're coming through into that stem extension phase and as we're getting the money leaves are starting to appear, it's really important that we're not just mixing our products, making sure that we're alternating and making sure that we're stewarding the products that we have.
And they can find information out about that
in our cereal disease management strategy, and also keep an eye out for any field days that we might be having.
Anything different going on with barley?
Barley is the problem child. All of the great IPM and integrated disease management strategies that we have for wheat, like cultivar selection and cultural control and making sure we've got a good azole backbone to our program. With barley, we don't have a lot of those things because the main disease we're really worried about is Rummularia leaf spot. And Rummularia leaf spot has lots of issues with resistance. So the likes of the strobilurins are off the table. The likes of the STHI, so that group 7 family, is big question marks around that. There are definitely places for those products within a program, but they're not necessarily going to be controlling that Rummularia. Also, they don't have the same cultivar tolerance that a wheat crop has. So really for a barley crop, it's really important to mix your modes of action and having a really good, solid mixture of products and include things like multi-sites. And we've only got one that's registered for cereals, and that's the likes of Volpit. Making sure that you're stewarding the products, because we know that there are those resistance issues out there, and make sure that you get your timings right. So for barley, keeping that window between your growth stage 31 and your growth stage 39 to 49 reasonably tight. 3 weeks is okay, 4 weeks at a pinch. And again, it slightly depends on the amount of pressure you've got in your system.
So that's cereal diseases. Is that a summary of everything to be worrying about at the moment?
Oh, this sounds like an awful lot to be worried about, but it's actually part of the norm, and there are a lot of resources that VAR can help you with. Have a look at those documents online, come along to our field days, and all the information you would need would be there. And that includes information on some of the newer products that are out there this season.
Okay. Pests, diseases, nutrients.
Right. So again, now is the time where you'll be making your decisions. The bulk of your program is going to be towards the earlier part of that stem extension phase if you've got an autumn sown cereal, and really have a look at the document that's been recently released, the nitrogen management strategy, confidence to cut back. And there is some guidance around tools that you can have, the likes of the nitrogen quick test, so you can use some of those tools to validate your decision making going forwards. If you're spring sown, and for some of those North Island growers who are sowing later in the spring and have malting barley, really important to consider how much is in your soil, because as we warm up, that soil is not going to stop. It's like the engine room. So really, really consider how much you're putting on at the startup. And if you are thinking about side dressing, again, use some of those tools to help make that decision for you, because we know that if things go wrong and you've got a malting barley, it's easy enough to blow out the protein at that top end. So know what you've got. That's the biggest thing that you need to take away, is know your numbers that you've got at the start.
Now we will move on to some seed crops with Richard. What is going on with grass seed crop management at present?
Similar to what Joe said, everything. October is always a busy month where we're looking through, trying to squeeze everything in from closing, so the last grazing or defoliation. Trying to squeeze that, heavy rolling, last of the herbicides, and first of the PGRs in. So right on everyone's mind at the moment will be closing date for perennial ryegrass. So Nui's will have been closed in the last sort of 10 days, and probably right now in the likes of Southland. So it's a matter of trying to pick those, and Italians are still be the end of October. So the difference being Italian ryegrasses, we can graze off some growing points. So those growing points will be starting to move above ground level now. Joe talked a lot about growth stage 31. Well, we'll be there with Nui, tight flowering dates right now. So we're only 7 to 10 days away from PGR application. So key things to think about with that is to try and time it at least 10 days away from a wild oat herbicide. Wild oat and squeezing wild oat herbicides in right at the moment will be quite topical with growers, especially of annual ryegrass. Growers need to check with their company reps at the moment about availability of the different products. The Flam Prop type products may or may not be available. They weren't available really last year. So growers need to consult around the use of the Puma type products, especially on annuals, and you need to be at least 10 days away from a PGR or herbicide application.
So the key issue with wild oats this year isn't necessarily that they're any worse than usual, it's just the availability of that product.
Yeah, so it was an issue last year around getting availability of product. This year, the product we gather has been made and is getting it to New Zealand. So like a lot of things at the moment, shipping and getting into the country may be a hold-up. We don't know. We'll wait and see. It might arrive just in time.
And so what's the issue with your wild oat spray before a PGR?
So we don't want to be too close to a PGR. So we know when we get inside within that 10-day window that we start seeing drop-offs in yield, mainly caused by more damage from the wild oat herbicide. So try and keep that window as large as possible. We really want that window to be 10 days from heavy rolling as well. So it all really does concertina up at this time of the year, especially if we get warm 3 weeks of northwest weather. Things are tracking about normal. Growth stage 31's probably about normal for Nui and Canterbury at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the closing dates are running, maybe a fraction late, but very similar to the past few years.
So what about irrigation?
So irrigation, always a tricky one. As I said at a few field days last week, we're only one dry southerly away, really, from starting irrigation. So starting is the hardest decision to make, because you've got to know how full the bucket is, really, and you've got to have it full enough that you can get right around the system before it gets too dry somewhere else. So I think right at the moment, most soils in Canterbury, especially at the lighter end, are half full. The heavier ones might be 2/3 full. So we're only like always 10 days away from drought with 10 days in all west, or we're one dry southerly away from starting irrigation. And by the time this goes live, we might have just had our last good southerly storm for the season. Who knows?
The season has been pretty favourable for most crops so far.
The season's been challenging. There's been some challenging events, but at the moment things are set up quite nicely, I think. There's there has been a lot of hungry crops coming out of winter that have taken a bit of kicking into gear, so to speak, to get going.
Has that been a function of heavy rain and leaching, or?
I think it's probably been a function of, it's actually been cooler, a lot more frost than we might have had for the last 2 seasons. And added to that, the heavy rainfall events through winter have lost a lot of nitrogen, sulphur out of the system. And then it hasn't been super warm. There's been some northwest weather and bits and pieces, but it's a matter of now, well, things are starting to warm up and the radiation receipts are increasing as the days get longer, to really try and promote some growth now where it's needed, not necessarily needed in ryegrass at the moment. So at the moment, we're really just setting things up, trying to drive tillering with nitrogen on the later season ryegrasses. We really want to drive biomass growth and things in about 3 weeks after PGR application, really. So that last lot of nitrogen will really promote things along.
Right.
It's been a challenge to get them to grow, and I think a lot of growers will have seen ryegrass struggling to produce a lot of biomass this year for grazing. But there are a few annual ryegrasses around that have grown really well, and they usually grow a bit earlier than the perennials. And there's patch grazing in those is becoming a wee bit of a problem for some growers. So they might now require a tidy up with some topping near the end of the month to even the paddocks up and bring them back to hopefully an even flowering date.
So are there any diseases in grass seed crops we should be thinking about?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of, especially in ungrazed crops, there's quite a bit of rust in the base of crops at the moment. They shouldn't really worry about it yet. Don't worry too much until that PGR timing, when we're often applying a triazole fungicide, and that'll take care of most of the rust. So most of it's crown rust and a wee bit of leaf rust that's ticking away, and the leaf rust probably becoming slightly more frequent over the last few years. So that first fungicide should clean most of that up, and then the growth will keep ahead of it, and we'll be looking at another fungicide around flowering or head emergence flowering time. Between them, the rusts are a lot easier than the diseases Joe was talking about for controlling, where a triazole strobe or SDHI combination will keep them at bay. The exception to that rule being stem rust, which isn't really an issue at the moment. It's the risk of stem rust at the moment has been really low with the frosts we've been having, but as we start to see true stem emerging in another month, that risk factor will increase and become a talking point for November, December.
Speaking of which, we've been through 2 sets of cereal and ryegrass field days, and there's another lot coming up in early November.
Late October, early November.
So for growers in Canterbury and Southland,
Yes.
at this stage it's pretty hard to schedule anything in the North Island. I'm sorry, people up in the North Island, but if you've got questions, please do feel free to get in touch and we'll do our best. But getting across Cook Strait at the moment are not looking terribly good in the short term.
We remain hopeful, but
We do remain hopeful. We have them sort of scheduled in our calendar, but we haven't been so bold as to go ahead and actually organise anything yet. But we can do stuff overnight. So as soon as those gates are open, we'll figure something out. I guess the other thing when you talked about is ARIA, which is sneaking up. It's only really a month away. So Wednesday, the 24th of November, you will both be there and speaking.
Yes.
Jo, what are you going to be covering?
I will be covering, and I'll be with Alison Stewart and Suni Ching from Plant and Food. With Alison, we'll be talking about biopesticides and where you can start on farm, because we know there's a lot of products and a lot of people coming up farm gates. How do you make a decision on how to start and what to do? And also we'll be, with Suni, we'll be talking about the Rummel Area Sustainable Farming Fund project, which is reaching its conclusion.
Grass and herbage and seed crops.
So we've got some nitrogen work going on at Chertsey that we want to cover. We want to give growers confidence with the nitrogen programs we've been running through for the last 5-10 years now, that's still appropriate. And also we're looking at some new tools to try and give them that confidence throughout the season. So we'll be showing those plots and treatments off. And I'm not 100% sure what else we'll cover, but we've got some stem rust work that'll be there.
Yep.
And we may or may not talk about grass growth. And we'll see how that pans out in the program.
Yeah, ARIA's all up in the air. Well, it's definitely going ahead on Wednesday the 24th, but the format is a little bit up in the air with thank you COVID again. So whether we run our usual 12 talks or reduce it back to 8 for a bit of crowd control, we're not sure, but we'll let you know closer to the time. Jo, Richard, thank you very much. Thanks for the listeners and have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.